Since Congress created the first federal regulatory body over 130 years ago, people have debated the appropriate role in what has been termed the fourth branch of government. Regulation and deregulation have shaped regulatory practices in the U.S. since the mid-1900s until Joe Biden's presidency. Subscribe to Happen Just Now for more content about accountability of all public officials and policy and procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been really interesting. We've got one witness who basically thinks regulations should be apparently endless because they all save lives. So I thought I would just bring up some places that we regulate. You checked out the ketchup regulations lately. Check that out? The ketchup regulations define very clearly what ketchup is. Normally we would say, how about the marketplace determine that? I go in and I get the one brand and I think it's a little too thick, I'm not going to buy it next time. Or I buy one, it's a little too thin, I don't buy that next time. Because it isn't the ketchup regulations are not designed necessarily for safety, because you got a whole host of safety regulations over here. Ketchup regulations about thickness and etc. How about this one? You pull it up on here. You go over cheese. Just look at the cheese regulations. Those don't have nothing to do with safety. But you got Asiago cheese and old Asiago cheese. And you got brick cheese. And it's pages and pages and pages of regulations. And guess what? If you don't adhere, and if your Asiago cheese doesn't quite meet that regulation, guess who investigates you? Well, it's the same people who made the regulation. Who's gonna impose sanctions upon you? Same group of people. Let's see, who else? I just took buns, hamburger buns, bakery goods, pages and pages. Not only, they're in 3 different sections of the CFR. Man, you can go after buns. But by golly, we're not overregulated. Microphones, they're regulated. Everything comes back to regulation. And so I think one of our witnesses testified just moments ago that they are the center or axis or whatever of basically lawmaking and policy making in America today. Really are. How about this one? This was fun, coming from Arizona. The EPA was going after Arizona, demanding that we pay to clean up some pollution in the Grand Canyon, except for they acknowledged that it was causing no harm to either the canyon or any personnel. But the thing that really drove us crazy is that all of that was being blown over from the Southern California LA basin. But we were going to get stuck paying for cleaning it up. And the process that they were invoking upon us, based on their regulations, would have cost us tens and tens of millions of dollars, and yet they admitted it would not change the appearance, nor would it actually clean the air. That's what you get when you rely solely on clean air, on regulations. How about this one? In Arizona, OSHA came after Arizona and said, you have not, as required, adopted our federal fall standards, our regulations. We're going to come after you and shut you down, and we're going to take away your ability to enact our OSHA standards that we're imposing upon you. Our response was, but our fall standards are more rigorous and statistically show a safer fall standard than the feds. But we ended up getting sued. We sued back, and we had to settle and say, we'll be less safe and we'll have to adopt the federal standards. When I hear people say that, man, if you don't have federal regulations, you're not going to be safe, I think, well, who's actually applying those federal regulations? It's virtually every state. Arizona DEQ applies the EPA standards for the most part. Arizona's Occupational Labor Department imposes, in many cases, more rigorous regulatory standards than OSHA. But we are stuck because OSHA wants to come in and impose. You want to know why people say we're getting overregulated? It's because even when a state undertakes its own regulatory constraints and its own regulatory framework, the federal government insists upon its regulations coming in, as if everybody in a state is a total dumpkin. That's overreach, and that's the authoritarianism of the fourth branch of government, federal regulation, federal administrative state. I'll yield back.
Very good. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I just have to commend Congressman Connolly for his strong performance. And he took my reference to the jungle that I wanted to discuss today as well. But, you know, it's really just astonishing to me that we are having a hearing today about regulations, not a specific regulation, just regulations. Are they good? Should they exist? Let's dig into it. We long know that regulations are written in blood. That's very often what is communicated by people, by communities, by labor, by workers, by many more. And even now, you know, hearing a mockery of cheese, right? You have Republicans saying, oh, look at how tightly regulated our government is. We even regulate cheese. Well, pregnant women cannot eat all forms of dairy because this is a food that contains bacterial growths, and it poses risks. But perhaps if the other side of the aisle had more fluency and had more knowledge of a woman's body, perhaps they would suffer less in this policy making. Let's look at other current regulatory rollbacks the Republican Party is currently trying to pursue. Let's talk about airlines. Right now, we are seeing that lawmakers and Republicans are currently trying to push rollbacks on airline regulations. This has come with the forceful pushback from the Pilots Association, as well as communities that have suffered and who have lost families on this. But let's dive in. What we are seeing right now is Republicans trying to roll back a rule on the number of hours that pilots must require in order to train, in order to be licensed. And Ms. Katzen, are you familiar at all with the Federal Aviation Administration's 1,500-hour rule?
Very lightly, but yes, I'm aware of its requirements.
This rule requires a pilot in training to have a minimum of 1,500 hours of flight time before flying a commercial plane. Seems pretty reasonable to me. If you're dealing with thousands of people and transporting thousands of people and commanding an airplane, it seems like you should have pretty thorough training. This rule was enacted not because of some bureaucrat having an idea somewhere, but it was enacted as in 2010 following the Colgan airplane crash that tragically killed 50 people near Buffalo, New York. Now, once the rule was mandated by Congress, FAA implemented the law. And we're hearing the same arguments from the other side of the aisle saying these regulations are too onerous, that it's too much of an imposition. But these families have paid the price. They have paid the price. When we see these regulations, and we have heard it themselves, including from the president of the Pilots Association, saying these regulations are written in blood. Food regulations. This committee has overseen PFAS poisoning. Communities that are often low income, that don't have anyone to protect them. Rural, urban, inner city, wherever. They are poisoned when they are not protected, and that is the actual term. People discuss the term regulation. What these are protections for people, often who have no one else to protect them, who do not have a corporate legal team to protect them, who have endured loss, who have endured disease, fertilities, cancers. This is why we have regulations. Ms. Katzen, from your experience and expertise, even though a rule is mandated by Congress, for a rule like this to be implemented, it would still have to go through an extensive process, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And a rule like this would go through an extensive process, oftentimes to ensure safety for people, right?
Correct. And the input of those on the ground who may know more than those who are drafting the rules. So it's an informed process.
And unsurprising to no one, this regulation had a massive impact on fatalities with the pilot hour requirement, training hour requirement. From 1990 to 2010, the FAA counted 1,720 fatalities involving passenger and cargo flights. Once the rule was finally implemented, from 2011 to 2021, the FAA counted only 14 fatalities. 14. Only 14 fatalities after implementing this rule, when the direct years prior to that, we saw 1,720 Americans dead. And yet we're here discussing rolling back a regulatory state, not even pointing out a specific area. Not even a specific area. I mean, what are we here for? I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, but the purpose of the committee hearing is to talk about many different regulations. And I'm amused that the gentlelady is concerned about raising the age, the regulation that limits the age for pilots when there's a shortage of pilots, but they're okay with a President of the United States who's more than 20 years older than the minimum age.
Mr. Chairman, since you're referring to me, it's not age, it's training hour time. The number of hours that an individual is training, not the age.
Thank you for watching, and subscribe to Happen Just Now for more content about accountability of all public officials and policy and procedures.